Hello and welcome back to the Life Learners podcast. Apologies for the delay in a new episode. I know that the last time we recorded an episode and released one was back at the end of August, and so September has kind of been a little bit dry when it comes to the podcast. But I will admit, September has been somewhat of a quiet month for watches. I think as the summer sort of comes to an end, many brands are sort of preparing for their winter releases, and obviously winter is a very busy time in the watch industry. So I'm sure everyone was preparing for that as well. On the vintage side, of course, brands are preparing for their autumn and winter auctions to take place. I know Monaco Legend Group has posted a few things on Instagram about their auction that's going to be taking place on the 19th and the 20th of October. So it's a very exciting thing to be looking forward to. I believe their catalog will be released on the 25th, so stay tuned for that. Be sure to be following them on Instagram, or I'm sure we'll cover some of our favorite lots from that auction. But that will be coming very, very soon. So I thought I would use this podcast to, follow up on one of the things that I spoke about on the last podcast, which was the new Mad Editions releases. And then I'll also speak about two new vintage watches that we have that we'll be covering. So I wanted to go through those as well. So to start off, the company the company that's sort of a spin-off of MB&F called Mad Editions, they released a new version of the Mad 1 called the Mad 1S, and this was a very similar piece to the previous Mad 1s they had released, where they have this really cool designed watch for a fairly affordable price. And what they do is they basically have a lottery system where you can register and be allocated to purchase one of these pieces. It was 3 years since they released the first Mad 1, which was pretty incredible. The first release was really for their friends and tribe members that were involved with MB&F for such a long period of time. What's really interesting, what they have stated in their release, was that they are actually working on a Mad 2, and that is slated for next year, which is quite exciting. But to bridge the gap between the Mad 1 and the Mad 2, they came out with the Mad 1S, which the way that Max Pusser described the S is three things. The first is that it's slimmer, so it's 18.8 millimeters, or the 18.8 millimeters tall was how big the Mad 1 was, but they were able to shrink that height down to 15 millimeters with this new piece. And the way that they did that was they actually removed one of the discs that tells the time. So instead of having an hours and minutes disc, you only have an hours disc, which is quite interesting. But are you really using it to tell time? I don't know. But that is one feature where they were able to make it slimmer. The second thing that they were able to do was come up with a relatively new design for the piece. So what they did was they definitely changed some of the design specifically for the lugs that made it a little bit slimmer on the wrist. And I think looking at videos and pictures of people with the watch on the wrist, it definitely looks like it sits quite comfortably on the wrist. So a nice little bit of redesign there. And then the other thing is that they have incorporated a Swiss move into the watch. So when they launched the original Mad 1, the only movement at that specific price point with a unidirectional winding mechanism was a Japanese Miyota 821A. But over the last couple of years, a manufacturer called La Joue Perret has developed an automatic caliber with a unidirectional winding mechanism, which is the La Joue Perret G101. And so they've moved that movement into the new Mad 1S, which is quite exciting. And then these pieces came in two colors. There was one that was in purple, exclusively for the friends and tribe members, And then there was an ice blue edition that was also released that everyone could raffle for. So quite an exciting release, and really, really nice colors. I really like the blue. It's a really beautiful sort of lighter blue. I like that very much. And obviously the purple being for tribe members is quite nice as well. This has long been the raffle has ended. The people who were able to get them were allocated, so I'm sure these are shipping out already. But I wanted to cover them nonetheless. I'm really excited to see what the MAD 2 is going to be like. What they described in their release was that the MAD 2. They've been fiddling around with the MAD 1, to come out with a MAD 1S. It'll be interesting to see if the MAD 2 is going to be a complete redesign or a completely new design that they're coming out with, but we'll have to stay tuned for that next year. All right, moving on to vintage watches, which I'm sure some of you are excited about. So we have two vintage watches that we got in. We've got a couple more coming in that we'll be covering on lifeandthewrist.com. The first is a really classic Tudor Prince Oysterdate reference 74000N. This is a Tudor Tudor Oysterdate from 1988. It's super, super classic. Some may describe this as somewhat boring. Tudor obviously has released many Oysterdates over the life of the brand, and the 74000N, the version that we have, is a stainless steel Oysterdate with a smooth stainless steel bezel. Additionally, it has this white dial that has somewhat aged. It's kind of more of a creamy tone now, but it also has gold applied hour markers that I think are very attractive. Overall, I think it's really nice looking piece, but it really is simplistic. I know a lot of the times watches are about sort of making a statement. I think even more now that is a very, very true statement. People are looking for something that is going to stand out in the crowd. This Oysterdate is definitely the opposite of that. It's super classic in its style, 34 millimeter case. It looks very much like obviously the Rolex Datejust, and has a really beautiful, in my opinion, smooth stainless steel bezel. A lot of the times people are more attracted to sort of a gold bezel, but that does have sort of a two-tone feel to it. I actually think this being stainless steel is a really nice looking piece that allows for the watch to be super understated. So it's not something that is going to make a lot of noise when someone sees it on the wrist. It really does sort of slide under the radar. And I think this, if you are in a professional setting, is a wonderful watch because it has the stylistic elements that you would want in a piece, a really useful complication in a date, but it isn't something that people are going to be staring at and wondering what it is. So I do really, really like it. It has a Rolex bracelet as well, which is really nice. One of the things I really like about this specific watch is the condition. I think the condition of the lugs shows, there likely has been a little bit of polishing, but they still are very, very strong. A lot of the times with these pieces, you see super over-polished pieces, or over-polished lugs, and I saw a couple of these recently where the lugs were just super rounded and wasn't really exactly, to my taste of how I would want one of these pieces to condition-wise to be in. And I think on the Rolex Oyster bracelet, I think it looks really, really nice as well. It's running on the caliber 2824 automatic winding movement. The 2824 is a great ETA-based movement. It's a workhorse movement that is going to get the job done, and a really, really lovely piece. I've had a lot of questions on this specific watch because of how, I think it's a really great example condition-wise. The next piece I wanted to talk about was a really interesting triple calendar watch, or a full calendar watch that I was able to find. I was doing a little bit of reflecting on some of the pieces that we've been able to cover on Life from the Wrist, and some of my favorites that we've been able to cover actually are there was one watch in particular from Le Coultre that we had covered on the channel. and I'm going to find the specific piece. I'm just want to make sure that I can speak to it. Yes, so it was a triple calendar moon phase watch from Le Coultre from the 1950s, and one of the things that I really loved about this piece was how phenomenal it fit on my wrist. It was a 35 millimeter triple calendar piece with the caliber 486-AW manual wind movement in it. It had a white dial with a pointer date, obviously, that around the outside of the watch. It had a day of the week and the month windows just before the Le Coultre, or under the Le Coultre signature, and then a really beautiful subsidiary seconds dial with a moon phase indicator. One of the other things that it had that really blew my mind was the numerals were Breguet, which I think in a Breguet font, which is just another reason why I absolutely love this specific piece. And so that really got me thinking about watches that I want to cover on the channel. And I think I would like to spend a little bit more time on triple calendar moon phases, full calendar moon phases, because I think the complications are really beautiful. I was able to find a really nice Enicar from the 1960s. It's quite an interesting piece. So what you have is a 33 millimeter gold-plated case that has sort of a double-step design to it with really nice claw lugs that obviously make the watch sit a little bit larger on the wrist, but also the claw lugs stand out quite nicely. It's got a stainless steel case back, and then what you have is a really beautifully aged dial. I would imagine that this watch, when it was released, was white, but the dial has aged to a really beautiful sort of dark toasted brown color, which I think is really attractive. Similar to the Le Coultre, it's got the day of the week and the month at just below 12 o'clock, and then it has a pointer date that goes around the outside of the dial. The pointer is blue, and then the numerals are also in blue. What's really interesting about this piece is that the movement is an Enicar movement, but on the dial, it doesn't actually say Enicar. It says Prince Watch Limited, and then it has at 6 o'clock 12 joules anti-magnetic. And if anyone knows anything about Prince Watch Limited, please let me know, because it's very difficult to find any information about them. But I do know that Enicar, amongst other brands, a lot of the times they would work with other companies to provide them with movements and cases, essentially full watches that those companies could use. And a lot of the times they were jewelers, and the jewelers would sell them, but they would then stamp their dials with the name of their company. And I do know that there is a Prince Watch Limited company that was out there, but I'm having trouble finding any sort of documented history about their relationship with Enicar. And so this is, me guessing that there was a Prince Watch Limited jewelry company or a watch company, and Enicar basically provided them with this watch that they sold in their store. A really interesting piece, really beautiful on the wrist. I think the claw lugs make it stand out in such a nice way. Unsigned crown as well. Beautiful, beautiful piece. And this, I hope that we can cover more of these pieces as we go into the sort of winter months, because I think this complication is so nice and, in my opinion, underappreciated. So a shorter episode, I apologize. Not too much going on in the world of watches that we are going to cover on this podcast, but I hope this at least gave you a little bit of a taste of some of the things that we've been up to over the last several weeks. I hope you all have had a great end to your summer and you are getting excited for the autumn. I'm sure, at least if you're in the northern hemisphere, you're getting excited for the autumn. For those of you in the southern hemisphere, I hope your spring is going well, and I'm sure you're excited for the summer months. With all that being said, I do hope that watches are filling your time and you are enjoying them as much as I am. This year has been a very exciting year, and I hope that it continues. If you are new to the Life Learners podcast, be sure to follow us so you're notified when we do upload an episode of this podcast to whatever podcast listening platform that you use. If you are new to Life on the Wrist, be sure to head over to lifelearners.com if you want to get some more videos, articles, content from us. There'll be links in the show notes of this podcast to all of our social medias, as well as our website. If you wouldn't mind rating this podcast, it really does help me out. And if you want to drop us a line and let me know what you want us to cover during this podcast, I'm always game to look into any of the topics that you would like to hear about on this specific podcast. With that said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and until next time.